I told you explicitly that this was not appropriate. Do you think this is a game?
The first time Naomi Brooks walked through the Whitakers' front door, she noticed how the house seemed to breathe. Not loudly, not proudly, just a quiet hum, like it had secrets tucked between the polished wooden floors and the smell of fresh linen. The place was warm but distant, all white walls and perfect symmetry, the kind of house where nothing was ever out of place and silence had its own authority. She was hired as a cook and part-time cleaner. A temporary arrangement, Mrs. Whitaker had said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Naomi nodded, clutching her worn handbag tighter. She'd heard those words before, temporary. They had followed her from one job to another, like a whisper she could never shake off. Still, Naomi worked as though permanence might notice her effort. Her mornings began before sunrise, with the smell of roasted coffee and the low hum of the boiler. By the time the Whitakers descended from their rooms, the kitchen gleamed and breakfast was ready. Scrambled eggs, warm croissants, sometimes porridge on colder days. She didn't speak much at first. She didn't have to. People often assumed quiet meant simple, and Naomi had learned to let that assumption guard her. The Whitakers were polite in the way rich people often are when they want to seem kind. Mr. Whitaker worked in finance, always half distracted, his voice trailing numbers. Mrs. Whitaker taught art history online, though most days she spent longer arranging her flowers than her lectures. Their daughter Emily was 12, tall for her age, pale and slender, with eyes that seemed too tired for a child. Naomi noticed it within the first week. Every afternoon, when she brought tea to the study, Emily would sit at her desk, lips pressed together, shoulders hunched over an open book. Her tutor's voice would echo faintly through the laptop speakers, sharp, British, impatient. Emily again, darling. Pronounce it properly. Pause. No, not sword, it's sword. The W is silent. Say it again. Emily's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. A sword. The tutor sighed, the kind of sigh that bruises confidence. Naomi would linger just long enough to see the girl's eyes glisten before quietly closing the door. That sound stayed with her, the small, trembling voice of a child trying too hard. One rainy Thursday, when the wind rattled the windows and the air smelled of wet leaves, Naomi found Emily alone in the kitchen. Her tutor had just signed off. The girl's notebook lay open, its pages filled with red circles and question marks. Her small hand clutched the pencil so tightly it trembled. You all right, love? Naomi asked gently, drying her hands on her apron. Emily startled a little, then nodded quickly, blinking back what she didn't want to say. Naomi looked at the page, words scrawled across in shaky cursive. Night through Island Choir. The kind of words that never sound like they look. They're tricky ones, those, Naomi said. English has a mind of its own. Emily looked up, surprised that anyone had noticed. I'm just stupid at reading, she murmured, almost like an apology. Naomi paused. Who told you that? The girl shrugged. Everyone knows. Mum says I just need to try harder. The tutor says I'm lazy with pronunciation. But I do try. The words just don't stay still. Naomi smiled softly, the kind of smile that carried empathy instead of pity. Maybe they just need a friend to help them behave. Emily frowned, curious. A friend? Naomi said, pulling out a chair beside her. You know, when I was little, I used to mix up words too. Especially the ones that looked fancy. So I started talking to them. Emily tilted her head. Talking to words? Yes. I'd say, now listen through, I know you've got that G and H in there for decoration, but you sound like through and that's final. Naomi's voice softened into playfulness and Emily laughed quietly, the first genuine laugh Naomi had heard from her. Something shifted then, something small but alive. Naomi picked up the pencil. Let's make a deal, eh? I'll help you for a bit after your lessons. Just for practice. But only if you promise not to tell your tutor, she might get jealous. Emily nodded quickly, a spark lighting behind her tired eyes. Deal. That evening, when Naomi washed the dishes, she caught Mrs. Whitaker's reflection in the glass door. Emily seems happier lately, her employer said casually, sipping her tea. Probably because the new tutor has improved her schedule. Naomi smiled faintly and said nothing. Sometimes truth was safest when it stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks. Naomi would help Emily after her shifts, sitting at the kitchen table under the soft yellow glow of the hanging lamp. They practiced sounds with wooden spoons as microphones, drew words on flour-dusted trays, turned rhymes into songs. Every word has a rhythm, Naomi said one night. You just have to find its heartbeat. Emily laughed at first, then listened, tapping her fingers as she repeated thought, bought, caught, slowly, steadily until the rhythm began to make sense. Their lessons became more than reading. Naomi would tell her stories, about her mother in Georgia who taught her poems while cooking, about saving up for books she couldn't afford, about the time she nearly got into university before life took a different turn. Emily soaked it all in, eyes wide. "You could have been a teacher," she said once. Naomi's smile faltered, then returned quietly. "Maybe in another life." But sometimes when she spoke, her accent softened into music, her words carrying the quiet confidence of someone who still believed learning mattered, even if the world hadn't believed in her. One late afternoon, Mr. Whitaker came home early. He walked past the kitchen and stopped, unseen for a moment, as Emily read aloud from her schoolbook, clear, steady, confident. Naomi sat beside her, nodding in rhythm. When Emily finished, Naomi clapped softly. "See? You're getting there." Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. Emily turned, startled. "Dad," she said, smiling wide. "I read all of it." He smiled awkwardly. "Did you now?" His eyes flicked to Naomi. There was something unspoken in his gaze, gratitude tangled with discomfort. "Well done, sweetheart." He turned to Naomi. "You've been helping her, haven't you?" Naomi hesitated, her fingers still resting on the open page. "Just a bit," she said quietly. Mr. Whitaker nodded. "She's improved more in 2 weeks than in 3 months of tutoring." He paused. "Thank you, Naomi." That night, Naomi sat in her small room beneath the attic stairs, the hum of the house around her. She looked at her hands, calloused from work but steady, and smiled to herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt like more than a maid. She felt seen, even if just through a child's eyes. Outside, the London rain whispered against the windows, steady and forgiving. Somewhere in that sound, Naomi heard the promise of something larger. Hope, maybe, or the faint rhythm of a new beginning. The winter sun came late that week, sliding through the Whitakers' kitchen window in faint ribbons of gold that couldn't quite chase away the chill. Naomi poured hot water over tea bags, steam curling up in slow spirals. Emily sat at the table, hair tucked behind her ears, tapping her pencil to an invisible rhythm. It had been nearly 2 months since their secret lessons began. What started as 15-minute word games after dinner had turned into full study sessions. Stories, riddles, laughter that occasionally startled the house into warmth. Emily's progress was undeniable. She could now read paragraphs without stumbling, her voice no longer trembling with the fear of getting it wrong. But something deeper had shifted too. Her eyes had grown more certain. She asked questions now, real, curious ones. "Miss Naomi," she said one evening, her voice small but curious, "why didn't you ever become a teacher?" Naomi's hand froze midair, the cloth she was using to wipe the counter dangling loosely. "That's a long story, love," she said softly. Emily leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I like long stories." Naomi smiled faintly, lowering herself into the chair beside her. "Well, back home in Georgia I wanted to. I studied hard, but it takes money to make dreams happen, and life doesn't always wait for you to save enough. My mother got sick and I had to work. One job became another, and before I knew it, books turned into cleaning supplies." Emily's brows knit together. "That's not fair." Naomi looked at her gently. "No, it isn't. But sometimes you can still learn even if no one gives you a classroom." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe you're my teacher now," she whispered. Naomi laughed softly, blinking away the sting behind her eyes. "Maybe," she said. "But don't tell your mom that. She might start charging me tuition." It was later that week when the calm began to fracture. Mrs. Whitaker came home early from a charity lunch, her perfume trailing through the hallway like authority itself. She stopped at the kitchen door, hearing laughter, Emily's laughter, and paused. "Sound it out," Naomi was saying. "Enough. I know, looks like it should be an ow, doesn't it?" Emily giggled. "English is such a liar." Mrs. Whitaker's voice cut through the room. "What's going on here?" Emily straightened immediately. "We were just reading," Naomi finished calmly, drying her hands. She was practicing her pronunciation. Mrs. Whitaker's expression was polite, but the kind of polite that carried edges. "Is that so? Well, that's lovely, but I don't think it's appropriate to mix household duties with academic matters. That's what her tutor is paid for." Naomi nodded slightly. "Of course, ma'am." But later that night, when she was cleaning the hallway, she overheard raised voices from the study. Mrs. Whitaker's tone was tight. "I don't understand it, Tom. She's improving, yes, but we can't have the staff." "Claire," Mr. Whitaker interrupted quietly, "Naomi's been helping her." That's the reason Emily's reading better. That's not the point. It's not her place. Naomi froze at the stairwell, cloth still in hand. Not her place. The words sank like stones. She turned away before she could hear more. Days passed. Mrs. Whitaker grew distant, her requests more formal, her tone clipped. Naomi felt it but said nothing. Emily, however, noticed immediately. "Mum's being cold again," she whispered one afternoon. "Did I do something?" "No, sweetheart," Naomi said, stirring soup. "Sometimes grown-ups forget that kindness doesn't cost anything." Emily frowned. "I wish I could fix it." "You already are," Naomi said. "By learning." That evening, when Emily's tutor canceled again, Naomi hesitated only a moment before sitting beside her. "All right, one more round. But don't tell your mum or we'll both be in detention." Emily laughed, opening her book. "Deal." They worked through tricky words, each success making Emily's face light up brighter. But as Naomi watched her, pride mingled with something heavier. She thought of her own childhood, how she'd sat under dim lamps reading borrowed books, dreaming of classrooms she'd never afford. She had buried that dream years ago, but Emily's laughter was digging it up again. Maybe, Naomi thought, teaching wasn't something you needed a certificate for. Maybe it was something you carried quietly, waiting for the right child to awaken it. Weeks turned to months and the house began to change in small ways. Emily's grades improved. The tutor took credit. Mrs. Whitaker boasted at luncheons about her daughter's sudden academic turn. But behind closed doors, Emily's gratitude belonged only to Naomi. She began leaving small notes on the kitchen counter. "You make words make sense. You're my favorite teacher. I'll read to you forever." Naomi kept them all tucked in a small box under her bed, folded neatly between her payslips. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a bright March day, the kind that carried false promises of spring. Mrs. Whitaker had guests, 3 other mothers from Emily's school. Naomi served them tea in porcelain cups while they discussed grades, tutors, and weekend homes. "She's doing so well now," Mrs. Whitaker said proudly. The new tutor made all the difference. Emily sat silently at the corner of the table, eyes flicking to Naomi. She swallowed hard, then spoke softly, "Mum, it wasn't the tutor." Mrs. Whitaker blinked. "What?" "It wasn't her," Emily said, her voice trembling but firm. "Miss Naomi helped me. Every day after dinner. She taught me how to read properly." The silence that followed felt like glass cracking. The other women glanced at one another, unsure whether to smile or sip their tea. Mrs. Whitaker's smile stayed frozen, but her eyes hardened. "That's very sweet, darling," she said, her tone clipped. "But let's not exaggerate." Emily shook her head. "It's true." Naomi stood still, hands clasped tightly behind her back. The air felt too thick to breathe. Mrs. Whitaker turned to her guests with a rehearsed laugh. "Children and their imaginations, honestly." But later that night, when the guests were gone, the silence returned, colder than before. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the kitchen door, arms folded. "I asked you not to overstep," she said quietly. Naomi looked up from the sink. "I never meant to, ma'am." She just needed someone to believe she could. Mrs. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "That's not your responsibility." Naomi hesitated. "With respect, ma'am, maybe it was." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Mrs. Whitaker said, "Finish your shift. We'll talk tomorrow." Naomi nodded. She washed the last dish in silence, her reflection rippling in the soapy water, tired, steady, unbroken. In her room that night, she unfolded Emily's last note. "You said words can change the world. Maybe people can too." She pressed it to her chest, eyes glistening. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew one thing. Her voice, once quiet and unseen, had begun to matter. And she wasn't ready to lose it again. The next morning arrived with the stillness that comes before a storm. Naomi woke early, the house yet untouched by footsteps or voices. She moved through her morning duties with deliberate quiet, polishing the marble counters, folding the linen napkins, setting the breakfast table with clockwork care. But her hands trembled slightly. She could feel the weight of yesterday pressing down on her like an invisible stone. When Mrs. Whitaker entered the kitchen, dressed in her gray silk blouse and pearl earrings, Naomi straightened instantly. The air between them was different, no longer distant politeness but charged with something unspoken. "Naomi," Mrs. Whitaker began, voice low and composed, "I think we need to have an honest conversation." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Whitaker sat, placing her cup down without sipping. "Emily's made remarkable progress, and I am grateful for anyone who supports her learning. But you must understand there are boundaries. I hired you as domestic staff, not as a tutor. Naomi clasped her hands. I understand, ma'am. I never wanted to cross any lines. I only stepped in because she was struggling and she— That's not your concern, Mrs. Whitaker cut in sharply. My daughter has access to the best tutors in London. It's not your place to intervene. Naomi nodded slowly, her throat tightening. I'm sorry if it came across that way, ma'am. I just wanted to help. Mrs. Whitaker sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You're intelligent, Naomi. That's clear. But people must stay within their roles, otherwise, things get confused. The word stung more than Naomi expected. Confused, she repeated softly. I see. Mrs. Whitaker rose, smoothing her skirt. Let's move on from this. Continue your duties as normal. And please no more lessons. Agreed. Naomi nodded, though the motion felt heavy, unnatural. Agreed. But nothing about the next days felt normal. Emily avoided her mother's gaze at dinner, her fork tracing circles in her peas. Lucas Whitaker, Mr. Whitaker as Naomi called him when the formality required, noticed it all. His eyes flicked between them but he said nothing. After clearing the plates, Naomi lingered by the sink, listening to the muffled conversation drifting from the next room. She's not talking to me, Tom, Mrs. Whitaker said quietly. She's obsessed with that woman. She's 12, Claire, he replied. Children bond with whoever listens. You can't punish her for that. Mrs. Whitaker's voice grew brittle. I'm not punishing her. I'm reminding her of boundaries. She needs structure, not sentiment. There was a pause, the faint sound of a sigh. Structure's good, he said softly, but warmth builds confidence. That's what Naomi gave her. The silence that followed was long and strained. Naomi turned off the tap, the water splashing against her wrist, cold and biting. That night, she lay awake on her narrow bed, watching moonlight crawl up the wall. It wasn't just the job she was worried about, it was Emily. The girl had begun closing herself off again, her newfound confidence retreating under her mother's disapproval. The next afternoon confirmed it. Emily came into the kitchen after school, eyes red, uniform untidy. She shouted at me again, she said, voice trembling. She said I embarrassed her. Naomi knelt, wiping the girl's tears gently. You told the truth, love. There's no shame in that. She said I made her look small. Naomi hesitated. Some people don't like being reminded they're human. Emily sniffed. Are you going to stop helping me? Naomi smiled faintly. No one can stop you from learning. You don't need my lessons to keep growing. You already know how to teach yourself. But I want to learn with you. Naomi's heart twisted. Then we'll find another way. Quietly. And they did, late evenings, soft whispers by the laundry room light. Emily reading from borrowed books while Naomi folded linen, correcting her gently, praising her softly. It became their hidden world, a fragile rebellion stitched from trust and care. It couldn't stay hidden forever. One Wednesday evening, as rain lashed against the tall glass doors, Mrs. Whitaker returned home earlier than expected. Her heels echoed sharply through the hall, pausing outside the laundry room door. Inside, Naomi and Emily were laughing. Emily reading aloud from The Secret Garden, tripping over the word mysterious until Naomi broke into giggles herself. Mysterious, Naomi corrected between laughs. Not mysterious, darling. Emily groaned dramatically, then tried again. Mysterious. There you go. The door swung open. The laughter stopped. Mrs. Whitaker stood in the doorway, eyes wide with disbelief, her umbrella dripping on the tiles. What exactly is going on here? Naomi rose quickly. Ma'am, I can explain. I told you, explicitly, that this was not appropriate. Her voice cracked, loud enough for Emily to flinch. Do you think this is a game? Emily stepped forward. Mum, it's not her fault. I asked her to help me. Enough. Mrs. Whitaker snapped. Go to your room, Emily. But. Now. Emily ran upstairs, sobbing. The sound of her door slamming echoed like thunder. Naomi stood still, hands trembling slightly but her chin raised. Ma'am, she's just a child trying to learn. I didn't mean to disrespect you. Mrs. Whitaker's eyes glistened, fury mixed with something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. You went behind my back. You defied me in my own house. That's not acceptable. Naomi took a breath, steady but trembling. With respect, ma'am, I didn't defy you. I helped your daughter when no one else had the patience to see her. Don't you dare. She needed kindness, Naomi said, voice breaking slightly. That's all I gave her. Mrs. Whitaker's voice dropped, cold and final. Pack your things. The words hung there, heavy and irreversible. Naomi's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Whitaker added, turning away. I'll pay you your due and call an agency to find someone else. The door closed behind her, leaving Naomi alone in the quiet hum of the washing machine, the smell of soap and lost thick in the air. That night, Emily slipped into Naomi's room, her small face blotchy from tears. You can't go, she whispered, clinging to her. Please don't go. Naomi held her tightly, heart cracking with the weight of the moment. I have to love. But you'll be fine. I won't. Emily sobbed. Mum's wrong. She doesn't understand. Naomi stroked her hair, whispering softly, sometimes people don't understand until they lose what they've pushed away. Emily pulled back slightly. Promise me you'll still write? Naomi smiled weakly. Always. When the girl finally left, Naomi sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the box of notes Emily had written her. She held one up to the light. You said words can change the world. Her tears fell onto the ink, blurring the letters. Then maybe mine will, she whispered. Outside the rain had stopped. The streets of London glistened in the lamplight, washed clean but heavy with the scent of something unfinished, like a story waiting for its next page. The following morning, the Whitaker household was quieter than usual. Even the housekeeper seemed to tread more softly, as if the air itself might shatter under too much sound. Naomi packed her few belongings into a small, worn suitcase, folding her uniform neatly, laying her Bible on top, and pausing each time she heard a creak in the hallway. Her chest felt hollow, but her resolve stayed firm. She'd been told to leave before. Life had taught her how to move on without bitterness. But this time was different. This time she was leaving behind something that mattered. When she descended the staircase, Mrs. Whitaker was already in the dining room. The light from the bay windows made her look paler than usual, her blonde hair tied in a tight bun, her posture as rigid as the antique chair she sat on. Your pay is on the counter, she said without looking up from her phone. I've also called the agency. They'll arrange your replacement by next week. Naomi nodded silently. The faint clink of her suitcase wheels against the marble floor was the only sound between them. Naomi, Mrs. Whitaker said suddenly, her voice softening by a fraction. You're a capable young woman. I hope you'll find work elsewhere, perhaps with people who appreciate your enthusiasm. Naomi managed a polite smile. Thank you, ma'am. It should have ended there. But then the door burst open. Don't you dare let her go. Emily's small voice tore through the still air. She ran straight into the room, her face flushed, a letter clutched in her hand. Mum, you can't do this. Please don't send her away. Emily, not now, Mrs. Whitaker sighed. We've talked about this. But Emily was trembling. You don't understand. Miss Edwards at school asked me to read aloud today. I read everything right, every word. Everyone clapped. She said I've improved more than anyone in class. Tears glistened in the girl's eyes as she turned to Naomi. You did that. You helped me. You made me believe I could do it. Naomi's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay composed. You did that yourself, Emily. I only showed you how brave you already were. Mrs. Whitaker stood slowly. Emily, darling, no one's doubting your effort. Yes, you are. Emily shouted, voice cracking. You're punishing the person who cared about me when no one else did. Why are you so mean about it? Emily. Mrs. Whitaker's tone sharpened, but there was a tremor in it now, one Naomi had never heard before. Naomi stepped forward gently. It's all right, love. You don't have to shout. Emily shook her head, crying harder. It's not all right. She doesn't see what you do. You make people feel safe. Naomi knelt beside her, brushing a tear from her cheek. You're strong, Emily. Stronger than you know. And one day you'll understand that even when things end, it doesn't mean they were wrong. The room went quiet again. The ticking of the wall clock filled the space like a heartbeat. Mrs. Whitaker stood frozen, her daughter's words sinking deeper than she wanted to admit. She glanced at Naomi, this young black woman with weary eyes and steady grace, and for the first time she truly saw her. Not as staff. Not as an employee. But as a woman who had given her child something she, with all her privilege, hadn't managed to give, patience. Emily, Mrs. Whitaker said softly, go upstairs, please. Emily hesitated, her tearful eyes flicking between them. Will you promise not to send her away? Mrs. Whitaker didn't answer. She only gestured toward the stairs. The girl went reluctantly, her letter dropping to the floor as she turned. Naomi picked it up. Her name was written in neat, wobbly handwriting across the envelope. To Miss Naomi. She opened it once Emily was gone. Inside was a note, decorated with tiny hearts drawn in colored pencil. Dear Naomi, you said words can change the world. I think yours already changed mine. Love, Emily. Naomi folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest. When she looked up, Mrs. Whitaker was watching her with an unreadable expression. You care deeply for her, Mrs. Whitaker said quietly. Perhaps more than I realized. Naomi met her gaze. She just needed someone to listen. Mrs. Whitaker turned away, walking to the window. Outside, the morning drizzle had begun again, thin, steady, relentless. She watched the raindrops slide down the glass, her reflection blurring in the mist. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, barely above a whisper, You remind me of someone I used to be. Naomi frowned slightly. Ma'am? When I was younger, Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice distant, I wanted to teach. I thought I could make a difference. But my parents said teaching wasn't respectable enough for our family. So I did what was expected. Married well. Managed a home. I forgot what it felt like to care about something honest. Naomi stayed quiet, sensing the crack in her armor. I've spent years trying to give Emily the best of everything, except the one thing that matters, time, Mrs. Whitaker continued. And you, with nothing but patience and kindness, gave her what money couldn't. She turned then, meeting Naomi's eyes for the first time. Maybe I owe you an apology. Naomi blinked, unsure how to respond. Ma'am, I don't need. But you deserve one, Mrs. Whitaker interrupted gently. You did right by my daughter when I was too proud to see it. For the first time in weeks, Naomi smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but quietly relieved. Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Don't leave yet. Stay until Sunday. We'll discuss what happens next. Naomi hesitated, her heart cautiously hopeful. All right, ma'am. Mrs. Whitaker gave a faint smile before turning back toward the rain. You know, she said after a pause, I think Emily's right. Words can change the world. Maybe they can change people too. That night, Naomi sat by her small window, the city lights glimmering beyond the rooftops. She reread Emily's letter under the soft glow of her bedside lamp, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. For the first time since arriving in this grand, cold house, she didn't feel invisible. Something was shifting. Not just in the Whitaker household, but in Naomi herself. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was no ending. It was the beginning of something she'd been waiting her whole life to see: respect, redemption, and the faint, flickering promise of justice. Sunday morning dawned quietly over West London. A soft light crept through the cream curtains of the Whitaker house, brushing across the breakfast table where 3 places were set instead of the usual 2. Naomi stood by the counter, pouring tea with practiced precision, her movements calm but her heart uncertain. She still didn't know what the morning would bring. For the first time in days, Mrs. Whitaker came down without the faint perfume of tension following her. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her expression softened by what looked like sleepless reflection. Mr. Whitaker followed soon after, jacket in hand, his usual calm presence carrying the weight of quiet observation. Emily was the last to arrive. She wore her Sunday dress, a pale yellow one Naomi had ironed the night before, and her hair was brushed neatly, though a few rebellious curls escaped near her ears. She smiled at Naomi shyly, a trace of yesterday's tears still visible beneath her eyes. Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker began, her voice steadier than Naomi expected. Before we eat, I want to say something. Naomi froze, teacup still in hand. Mrs. Whitaker turned toward her daughter. Emily, I owe you an apology. And I owe Naomi one too. The words landed gently, yet their impact was immense. She exhaled, steadying herself. I acted out of pride and fear, not reason. When I saw you two together, I didn't see kindness, I saw something that threatened my control. I've been so desperate to appear like the perfect mother that I forgot to be one. Emily's lips trembled. Mum? Mrs. Whitaker looked at Naomi then, her gaze unwavering. You've done more for Emily in a few months than some of her tutors have managed in years. You reached her heart before you reached her head. That's a gift no degree can teach. Naomi blinked back tears. Thank you, ma'am. I only ever wanted her to believe she could do it. She believes it now, Mrs. Whitaker said softly. And that's because of you. The silence that followed was thick but peaceful. Mr. Whitaker, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke. Perhaps it's time we stopped seeing people only by the titles we give them, he said. Sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones who do the most important work. Naomi looked down, overwhelmed. She had never been praised like this, not in her life. Mrs. Whitaker continued, her tone steady but emotional. I'd like to make you an offer, Naomi. I spoke to a friend at the local community college. She's part of a program that helps adults return to education. If you're willing, I'd like to sponsor you through it. You've earned far more than gratitude. You deserve opportunity. The words barely registered at first. Naomi stared at her, her lips parting in disbelief. You mean, you'd pay for me to go to school? Mrs. Whitaker nodded. It's the least I can do. Consider it an investment, in the same future you've been building for my daughter. Naomi's throat tightened. All the years she'd spent cleaning homes, scrubbing floors, being overlooked and underestimated, it suddenly felt like the universe was offering a quiet kind of justice. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Emily said, smiling through her tears. Naomi laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension in the room. Then yes. Yes, I'll do it. The air lightened instantly. Emily jumped from her chair and wrapped her arms around Naomi's waist, holding her tightly. Mrs. Whitaker watched, a faint, tearful smile on her face, part pride, part guilt, part release. Later that day, Naomi found herself standing at the bus stop with her small suitcase and her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. She wasn't leaving in shame now. She was leaving in promise. As she waited, she looked down at her phone. A new message from Mrs. Whitaker glowed on the screen. From Claire Whitaker, subject, recommendation letter. Naomi, attached is the letter for your college application. I wrote it from the heart. You have a gift, don't let the world convince you otherwise. Claire. Naomi smiled, tears stinging her eyes. She opened the attachment, her gaze lingering on the first line. To whom it may concern, Naomi Johnson is one of the most capable, compassionate and intelligent women I've ever met. She changed my daughter's life, and mine. The bus arrived, but Naomi didn't board immediately. She looked back once at the Whitakers' tall house framed against the soft London sky. Through the window she could just make out Emily waving from her room. Naomi waved back, heart swelling. Goodbye, love, she whispered. Keep building your bridge. Months passed, and London turned from the damp chill of autumn to the sharp brightness of spring. The city hummed with motion and noise, buses sighing, children's laughter echoing in parks, life moving as it always did. Inside a small community college tucked between red brick terraces, Naomi sat in a classroom for the first time in nearly a decade. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair neatly braided, her notebook open and already filled with handwritten notes. Around her were students from every walk of life, some young, some old, all reaching for something beyond survival. Her tutor, a kind woman with a Scottish accent, leaned over her shoulder and smiled. You've got a real knack for this, Naomi. You ever thought of teaching? Naomi laughed quietly. Once or twice. When the class ended, she walked to the college courtyard. Children played on the grass nearby, their laughter mixing with the rhythm of a nearby busker's guitar. She stood there for a while, soaking in the life around her, and for the first time she didn't feel invisible. She was part of something again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Guess what? I got top marks in reading today. Miss Edwards said I might join the spelling competition. Mum said you'd be proud. Are you? Naomi smiled, typing back quickly. Proud doesn't even cover it, sweetheart. Keep shining. She slipped her phone away, her eyes stinging with happy tears. A year later, Naomi stood at the front of the same community hall where she once cleaned the floors during weekend events. But this time she wasn't holding a mop, she was holding a folder of lesson plans. A banner above her read, Adult Literacy and Confidence Workshop, Lead Facilitator, Naomi Johnson. Dozens of faces filled the room. Single parents, immigrants, young adults who'd fallen through the cracks of a system too hurried to notice them. She began her session with the same words she'd once told a lonely 12-year-old girl. Words can change the world, starting with yours. The crowd fell silent, listening closely. She shared her story, not as a maid, not as a victim, but as a woman who found her voice through helping someone else find theirs. She spoke about dignity, kindness, and the quiet power of being seen. And when she finished, the applause filled the hall like thunder. At the back of the room stood Mrs. Whitaker, now a regular volunteer for Naomi's program, and beside her, Emily, taller, smiling proudly, clutching a notebook of her own. When the applause finally faded, Naomi caught Emily's eye. The girl mouthed two words, thank you. Naomi smiled, her heart steady. Don't thank me, she whispered under her breath. Just pass it on. That evening, as the sun dipped below the London rooftops, Naomi locked up the hall and walked home beneath the soft orange glow of streetlights. She passed the cafe where she'd once washed dishes, the narrow alley where she'd cried after losing her first job, and the small bookstore that now displayed her workshop posters in its window. Every corner of the city seemed to whisper back pieces of her journey. When she reached her flat, she sat by the window and opened the letter she always kept folded inside her wallet, the one Emily had written her. The ink was smudged now, the paper worn, but the words were still clear. You said words can change the world. I think yours already changed mine. She smiled softly. And yours changed mine too, little one. Outside, the city lights shimmered like constellations. Naomi leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, and let gratitude fill the silence. She had gone from a maid in someone else's home to a teacher of her own making. From invisible to indispensable. And maybe, just maybe, that was what justice truly looked like. Not revenge, not rebellion, but transformation. If you've made it to the end of this story, take a moment to reflect. How many Naomis do we walk past every day? People whose brilliance hides behind uniforms, whose kindness reshapes lives quietly, without reward or recognition. If Naomi's journey moved you, don't just scroll away. Share her story. Comment your thoughts below. What part struck you the most? And if you believe that compassion, education, and courage can still change the world, then like this video, subscribe, and help keep stories like Naomi's alive. Because somewhere out there, another voice is waiting to be heard. And maybe, yours could be the one that helps it speak.